I'm Andrew Clark, and I'm Head of Forestry at the Sylva Foundation. For any of you who haven't heard of Sylva, just very briefly, it's a national charity that promotes woodland management and increasing the use of homegrown timber to help ensure woodlands achieve their potential in terms of the benefits they provide to society and the environment. And there's much more detail about our aims and our charitable objectives on our website, which I'm sure Jen will share the link to. We do rely on donations for our funding, as well as some of the income that we receive from myForest subscriptions. So do consider making a donation. So our flagship product, if you like, is myForest, which is an online woodland management platform. And it helps users from small woodland owners right through to professional foresters managing thousands of hectares to map, record, plan and present all that they really need to manage their woodlands more efficiently and effectively. So firstly, I'm going to go through a presentation which should take about 20 minutes. Then I'll show you a live demo in myForest covering some of its useful features. We won't be going into a lot of detail today because there's a lot that could be covered. So I will deliberately just be skimming over the surface. But if you do have any questions about some of the more in-depth stuff, I will do my best to answer those in the questions at the end. There should be enough time for about 15 minutes worth of questions if I keep to my schedule. Although my brain is currently quite scrambled by the heat, so you may have to forgive me if I get in a muddle at times. So in front of you, we'll just, on your screens, you should be able to see some, what I think of quite nice images of woodland management. These are the sorts of images sorts of things I think about. When I think about woodland management, you've probably got your own ideas about what it means to you. It can mean different things to different people. But what I would like to start really by talking about is the UK Forestry Standard, because it's fundamental to woodland management in the UK. And I think it gives some good context to why and how we go about managing woodlands. So as you can see here, it is the gold standard. I've tried to pick a gold color for that to emphasize that, of sustainable forestry or woodland management. By the way, forestry and woodland management, they're kind of interchangeable terms in the standard. And so I'm going to be using them that way as well. So don't get too hung up on whether you think you're talking about a woodland or a forest. We just talk about them interchangeably. So the standard is on its 4th edition, which was released in 2024. It is a large, complex document. It's over 120 pages long. So we'll not be going into it in too much detail today, but I have taken some key extracts that hopefully distill its core message down into how it's applied mainly and what its main purpose is. So as you can see here, I've highlighted a couple of other things. In the UK, as we know, we're devolved. We have 4 different regulators in the 4 nations, and all of these have signed up to the standard. So it's genuinely a national standard, and it is used to implement government policy. Obviously, it's applied differently depending on local legislation and so on. And it is largely about legislation and regulation to make sure that we look after our forests properly, really. And we've got these nice symbols that they've come up with for the standard, which there's one for each chapter, and we've got 8 chapters that really cover all aspects of what we need to think about when it comes to sustainable forest or woodland management. So if we just get on to maybe thinking about what we might mean by sustainable, this is a Venn diagram. I think from my GCSE maths, that's the right term. And it demonstrates quite nicely, I think, the way that the 3 main areas of sustainability, and I believe in other contexts as well, but certainly in the forestry contexts, interact with each other. We've got the environmental, the economic, and the social aspects. Of course, there is overlap between them. And so I think it shows quite neatly how elements can be shared by more than one category. So if we're talking about income and employment, it fits within both the economic and the social circles. What I do want to highlight is that I hope you can see my mouse cursor, is that resilience is at the core. It's at the core of all 3. And really, if you want to think of a good overarching reason as to why we should manage woodlands, it has to be this one. especially in light of climate change. Over the last few decades, it's become more and more apparent that our forests need to be resilient. So without resilience, our forests don't have a future. And I think that's really an important take home. So just to mix things up a little bit and get away from the stale standard document, I've gone through all my photos on my phone in Google Photos, and with the help of Gemini AI, I've shortlisted three for each of the three areas on this diagram that I think are representative for those areas. And hopefully they'll help to illustrate them better in a woodland context than just words and Venn diagrams. So without further ado, let's just have a look at some hopefully pretty photos of things to do with woodlands. So we're going to look at the environmental, or if you like, biodiversity circle to begin with. They're not in order of priority. This might be the biggest priority for some people. It might not be for others. I've just picked it at random as the first one, really. This, I think, is a good demonstration of deadwood habitat, but you could maybe take other things from it as well. The next one, not a great picture. Took this a number of years ago using the zoom on the phone, so it hasn't come out very well, but I don't know if anybody would recognize what this is, but I'm told that it is a long-eared owl chick. And I just like the fact that it just shows you don't have to have a native species as a habitat for a native bird. This is a Douglas fir, and the long-eared owl chick is quite happily, and I believe that it was actually, the nest was in the tree as well. So it's just, it goes to show that we don't have to get too hung up about nativeness when it comes to species. We can provide habitats from non-native trees as well, which, considering that with climate change, some of our native species are predicted to have not very bright futures, for example, beech, we have to think maybe a little bit more about introducing more species. Think about ash as well and what's happened with ash dieback. So I'll just go on to the next picture, which actually... I really didn't want to talk over that wonderful bird song. This, in case you didn't recognize it, is actually a roe deer fawn, newborn and just being put in a safe place by its mother. And it did not move. I was so close to it. It was an amazing thing to see. So we'll move on to the next part of the circles, if you like. And the next one across there is economic. Here we have a picture of Forester. This is what Forester wants to see. Prime Douglas fir logs. Not sure where I took this photo. It might have been the New Forest somewhere. But this is the sort of thing that, if we're talking seriously about using homegrown timber and reducing our imports, we import something like 80% of the timber that we use in this country. This is the sort of thing that I feel we really need to be producing plenty of. Really good quality timber. And for the woodland owner as well, it's a good return, a good economic return. But we need to be able to manage our woodlands in order to produce these sorts of products. Okay, that might be what the forester wants. By and large, this is often what the forester gets, especially if we're dealing with undermanaged, neglected woodland. We don't have that history of management, that sort of over a long period of time that you really need in order to produce that really high quality end product. That said, this is firewood, and it's actually not bad. It's quite straight material. You can see that could go through a firewood processor quite well. So it's not a bad material, but at the end of the day, it is a lower value product than those saw logs. So it's not necessarily what we're aiming to produce, but it can be useful income, certainly for a woodland owner, and justifies even doing some sort of management intervention in a woodland. And then the third picture is a little bit different. I was lucky enough to visit a place called Norbury Park recently, where, among many other things, they are carrying out trials on carbon uptake in theoretical future climates where there might be more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And it's very, very clever the way they do this. They're literally pumping carbon dioxide into the tree canopies, which is why you can see some of these buildings clustered around, and they've got pipes and towers and all sorts of interesting things going on. One of the first results they found from this is that, yes, as you might expect, having a higher concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere has led to better growth in these oak trees. But what they've also found is that other things have now become limiting factors. So they're finding that the soil nitrogen is being depleted at a much more rapid rate. So the trees are maybe not going to be able to continue growing at those faster rates unless we get more nitrogen into the soils. The question really for me, and why I've put it in this economic category, is there's the possibility that in future, from existing woodland, owners might be able to get payments for the carbon that's being sequestered by their trees. It's possible when you plant a woodland to get that, because you can demonstrate that without the woodland, that land wouldn't have sequestered so much carbon. But with an existing woodland, there's no mechanism in place at the moment. But with experiments like these, we can at least sort of prove how much carbon is being sequestered and use that as a baseline for some sort of payment system. So just to close the circle, if you like, third element of sustainable forest management is social. And we've got some pictures depicted traditional crafts here. So making hazel hurdles, recreation. It's my daughter on a mountain bike from a few years ago. Education. In this case, it's an Exeter University climate change professor talking to a group of foresters. I'm afraid I couldn't find a photo of a forest school, which might be what most people might think about in terms of education in the forests, but this is one form of education in the forests. And as I've said, all of these do interact with each other. You think about those circles and the way they cross each other. So very few of these elements work in isolation. So I will just very briefly dive into the dense text that we have in the UK Forestry Standard. I've just highlighted in bold some of the words that I feel are important. And just to summarize, if you like, I've got 4 points from this paragraph in the middle. This is all from the beginning of the standard. So it says long-term planning. Woodland management is long-term. We're just custodians, and we should always bear that in mind. And I think many of us will understand what that means in the context of what we do might not actually bear any sort of fruit for us in our lifetimes, but it will for future generations. We've got previous generations to thank for the work they've done in producing trees, timber, woodlands that we have now. So we just need to carry on with that process. Plans need to be able to respond. They need to be flexible to threats that are unpredictable, like the changing climate and pests and diseases, which we'll touch on again. The standard recognises there's a huge variation in woodlands, so each needs its own approach. You don't have a one-size-fits-all. Depending on the size and the scale and the species and the climate where you are, all sorts of different factors come into play. This one here, yes, is a technical standard. It can be accessible, and there are tools out there to help it, to make it more accessible and to help interpret it. But at the end of the day, it's a technical standard, and if you're unsure, you really should seek expert advice. So the standard, just briefly, it consists of 3 sorts of information. We have what they're called legal requirements. If basically you don't comply with those, you're breaking the law. We've got good practice requirements, which you might like to think about in terms of things that you should do. And then we've got the guidelines, which are practical guidance on how you can meet those requirements. So the term to think about with these is that you should consider doing them. And that's really re-emphasized in this extract. So I'm just looking at my notes here. I think I've more or less covered those 3 points of the different sorts of information: legal requirements, best practice requirements, and guidelines. So this is the sort of graphic that they use to help you navigate through the document. Legal requirements have got the exclamation mark. Good practice requirements with the tick, and guidelines show the logo for the particular chapter that you're in. So this is the biodiversity logo. And just to reiterate, these are those 8 chapters. They're on the cover. This actually tells you what they are. So in case you couldn't guess, the butterfly is biodiversity, The water droplet is water. The two people together is people, and so on. So these really, they're the key, the cornerstones to sustainable forest management. All these sorts of areas have to be taken into consideration. Although, as I say, every woodland is different, and how important each of these elements is going to depend on your particular circumstances. For example, if there are no watercourses in your woodland, then you will have to consider the forests and water chapter, but it will be of less importance to you than it would be if there was a watercourse in your woodland. So the other thing to take away from here is in terms of implementation, how it's actually applied. It does apply to forest owners, managers, and contractors. So that's anybody working in the woods. And the forest, this phrase here really is that it's a prerequisite, I should say, for many of these regulatory regimes. So forests and woodland management plans, felling licenses and permissions, restocking, woodland creation and forestry grants, they all have to comply with the UK Forestry Standard. So it's really important that anyone managing woodland knows about it. This is just a quick slide to show you some more areas where you can find out more information about the standard if you want to. So the official guidance at the top here tells you about the standard, and you can actually download the document, but the document is just one big document. It's not bookmarked for different chapters and so on. You just have to scroll through it to find stuff. So at Sylva, we've actually broken it down into chapters, and on our website, you can access those individual chapters. So if you want to look at the one on soils, you can open up the one on soils and look at it. So that can be a more helpful way of looking at it. We also have in myForest, which I'm going to be talking about in a moment, a tool called UKFS Checker, which it's a self-assessment tool. So it allows you to sort of benchmark your current practices against the standard, see how close you are to complying with it. And essentially it asks you a series of questions based on those individual chapters to probe your understanding and awareness and how well you put it into practice. And there's a lot of support within the actual questionnaire that you fill in as well. And at the end of the process, you get a certificate and a report saying how well you did. Come back to it in a few years' time when you've maybe carried on managing your woodland, see if you're doing better. It's also a route into Grown in Britain certification. So if anybody's producing timber and is interested in getting certified, one of the prerequisites for that is you have to have an approved management plan. Another one is it's not a prerequisite, but you can also get access to the certification scheme if you've reached a certain level in UKFS Checker. And finally, the last one, Sylvester is an online e-learning platform for woodlands, trees, forestry, arboriculture, and they have an e-learning module for, it's basically called UK Forestry Standard for non-foresters. So you might be interested in checking that out as well. So just before we move on to myForest, I just thought I'd recap why manage woodland. So it sounds like a pretty basic question. Some of you may not even consider whether it's worth asking. Others might be thinking, well, why do we really need to bother? So I just thought I'd recap on that. I think it's worth remembering, these are my own words, that the terrestrial environment in the UK has been managed for thousands of years, and the various natural, in inverted commas, ecosystems, they're not really capable of functioning naturally without intervention, as they've already been so modified and fragmented. So getting neglected woods into management is now part of government policy, and government says that woodland is managed if it's either got an approved woodland management plan or a felling license has been issued, which is a bit of a crude measure, but it's all they've got really, because they don't really know much about, especially the private sector, privately owned woodlands. So based on that, they reckon that about 50% of privately owned woodlands in the UK are managed. It's slightly more in Scotland, slightly less in other places, but it's only half. So we've got a lot of ground to make up if we can sort of agree that woodland management is a good thing. So just to, reiterate why it's a good thing, we'll just have a quick look at those three pillars of sustainable forest management again. Give me an excuse to raid my photo bank again. So this would be the environmental pillar or circle. We've got native plants. We've got that deadwood habitat again, birds, animals. You see the context of the photo now in the little video I showed you before. The roe deer fawn was actually right next to a tree shelter. Inside that tree shelter is a French provenance oak. So the photo actually shows quite nicely, I think, how the environmental and the economic and potentially the social with employment and generating income for people are all mixed together. By planting French provenance oak rather than English provenance oak in England, as this photo is, we can hope that in future climate, when it's warmer, it's certainly warm enough today, the French oak is going to do better than the native oak. It's the same species, it's just from a slightly different part of its natural range. So we like to think that by using provenances from further south, we're going to be able to potentially get better growth and better timber as well. And the last photo there is of a veteran oak tree, which is actually in Windsor Great Park. So another nice example of great biodiversity in a woodland. And bear in mind that environmental sustainability can cover all types of ecosystem services. It's not just trees and plants and animals. It can be things like flood control. It can be things like climate change mitigation by actually sequestering that carbon that's in the atmosphere. And then a few more photos on the social aspect. And I must admit, this isn't a strong area of knowledge or experience for me. So please feel free to suggest some in the comments. That is different ways in which woodland management can benefit society, recreation, traditional crafts, said it before, and education, people using woodlands for different uses is what it's all about. And then the last one, I've chosen to put it last this time, the economic one. We touched on the Douglas fir saw logs, the firewood, the carbon sequestration, maybe getting carbon payments. The John Deere harvester, wrong side of £250,000 for one of these machines, so they have to work them hard. And this is the sort of product that they can churn out. So just to show that there are different ways of generating income from woodland. It's my view that without some financial return, many landowners really can't afford to manage their woodland, and with all the other benefits that can bring. So as a sector, we should not really be reliant on government grants. So we have to try and generate income from the woodlands directly rather than relying on government handouts. So we've nearly reached the end of this section now. I just wanted to touch on a few other topics because they are very important. So I mentioned how resilience is at the center of these three aspects. So I just wanted to now touch on some threats, which hopefully will sort of crystallize in your minds as to another good reason to manage woodlands, which is that with the amount of threats that they've got at the moment, if we don't manage them, they're going to cease to be in the form that they should be in, which is a natural, thriving ecosystem. So there isn't time to talk about these in much detail, but I just wanted to mention them in that context. These nice Forestry Commission posters, one on deer, and the next one on grey squirrels. I'm sure there are plenty of people here who understand the damage that can be caused by deer and squirrels and the importance of trying to deal with that issue. This I find quite a scary graph. So this shows the increasing prevalence of pests and pathogens in the UK, forestry pests and pathogens, since about 1970. And I think you can see the curve, which essentially is one step per new pest or pathogen, has been getting steeper. The last 20 years or so, there have been a lot more than there were in the previous 30 years. So whether that's related to climate change or globalization or whatever it is, it's something we need to worry about. And our woodlands need to be protected from all of this. One of those pests and pathogens that we're probably all quite familiar with is ash dieback. I've picked the Northern Ireland Forest Service apart from the fact that I've got connections and I've got Northern Ireland connections, like showing about it when we can. They've actually used the correct Latin name on their current poster, whereas I looked at the Forestry Commission one and they were still using, it was an old poster. It used to be called Calara fraxineus or Calara something else. No, it wasn't fraxineus. Hymenoscyphus fraxineus, I think, is the correct pronunciation, but I could be wrong. Calara fraxinea was the old one. And this is also a very current pest in some areas of the country, causing havoc on the continent where it's attacked swathes of spruce forests, particularly in Germany. Um, we're trying to prevent it from causing the same sort of havoc in England and potentially elsewhere in the UK. So essentially, we're trying to create a spruce-free zone in the southeast of England so that this pest can't leapfrog across into our Sitka spruce forests, which would be potentially disastrous. 'Cause we have so many of them. Wildfire, I should say. Again, incidences have been increasing with increased temperatures, so this is another major threat that we have to think about more nowadays. So yeah, just some of the threats that our forests are facing. And now I'm going to show you some of the features of myForest that can help you manage your woodland. So that's going to be the next step of the presentation, if you like. So a little introduction. myForest is a cloud-based, it's online geographical information system, or GIS for short, with mapping linked to a specialist forestry database. So the database is organized along compartments and subcompartments, which are the divisions that we use in forestry. You can download your mapping and data in a variety of ways, and there are digitized templates of official forms used for things like felling licenses or felling permissions in Scotland and woodland management plans. And we've also got decision support tools like the integrated support in the Forestry Commission Woodland Management Plan template, which we were fortunate to get funding from the Forestry Commission for, and UKFS Checker, which I've touched on, the self-assessment tool. We've got tutorials and guidance and links to other resources. So check us out and sign up if you're interested, if you haven't already. I think it's fair to say whatever your objectives are, record keeping is essential for effective woodland management. They did teach us that at university, and I suppose it's fair to say that if you're not too worried about knowing when you felled trees, when you planted trees, and so on, then you could do without it. But believe me, for the next generation of managers, if we knew, like the current generation, if we knew more about what trees we have in front of us now that we're managing, we would make a better job of it. And it's fair to say that in the future, if we can give that sort of information to our successors, then they'll make a better job of it. Knowing species provenance, early management, things like that. It's just a really useful thing to have. I can't overemphasize how important it is to have records of your woodland management. So myForest helps with this. It acts as a single source of truth. So rather than having a mapping system here, a spreadsheet here, a Word document here with all different versions, and you lose track of what's what, everything's stored in myForest. So any things that you download from myForest, it's all coming from the same single source of truth. So you can be sure that the information's as correct as it can be, really. So here are some examples of some of the outputs that you can generate from that data once you've entered it into myForest. This rather scary looking spreadsheet is called the Inventory and Plan of Operations spreadsheet. This is just one tab from it. And it's a standard Forestry Commission spreadsheet that you need to complete when you submit a woodland management plan for approval. It's used by the Forestry Commission to generate a 10-year felling license, which is one of the benefits of having a woodland management plan in place. A standalone felling license only lasts for 5 years. One that's combined with a woodland management plan lasts for 10 years. So most of the data, in fact, all of the data that you see in this particular view is pre-populated by myForest. You don't have to fill all that in manually, which is a nice bonus. This is an example of a woodland management plan as it would look if you completed it in myForest. If any of you have ever completed one using the Forestry Commission Word document template, it's a bit of a crude sort of template. It's awkward to use, but essentially when you've completed it, this is the same. It looks exactly the same. So this version, if you like, is accepted by the woodland officers working for the Forestry Commission. If you've produced your woodland management plan in myForest, you can submit it to the Forestry Commission for approval, just as if it was the standard template. You can also get pretty graphics. So a resilient woodland is a diverse one. And two of the main ways of measuring diversity are the range of species and the range of age classes. So we talk about age classes in forestry as bands of ages rather than specific ages. In this example, we've got, I think it's 1 to 10 years, 10 to 20 years, 20 to 30 years, and so on. So by seeing it in a graph like this, you can immediately see, is my woodland relatively mixed in terms of its age and its species, or have I got too much all in one age category, not enough young stuff, not enough old stuff, um, only one or two species perhaps. This particular woodland's pretty good, but there's clearly quite a big reliance on the blue one, which is pedunculate oak. So you might say, well, it should be like that if it's an English lowland woodland, which it is. You're always going to get some species dominating others, but there's a good range of other species too. In terms of ages, again, it's pretty good, but we could maybe do with not quite so many trees in this band and a few more in the younger band. So we can think about how we might tailor our management plan to try and achieve that. So that's one way of assessing, if you like, how good your management is. We'll just move on to the next slide. So now getting into the nitty gritty of how you actually manage a woodland in myForest. So myForest uses long established conventions with records organized into three hierarchical units. So I touched on the compartments and subcompartments already. At the highest level, though, we talk about something called the forest management unit or property. And quite simply, that's one or more individual blocks of woodland under the same ownership and in the same geographical area. So that's considered to be a forest management unit or property. So at the next level, we have compartments. So that's just highlighting the forest management unit, that map. At the next level, we have compartments. So compartments are broad geographic areas of woodland, typically bounded by fixed features such as rivers, property boundaries, other land uses. So this example, we've got a field here. So the compartment boundary runs along the boundary between the woodland and the field. Other land uses, I've said, or access tracks. They can be really useful boundaries. So there's an access track running along here. So that would divide this area from that area naturally. So we talk about them being different compartments. If you've only got a very small or simple woodland, there may only be one compartment, which is absolutely fine. And then the smallest level is the subcompartment. These are discrete areas within a compartment, which may be distinct in terms of their woodland type, their permanent or semi-permanent boundaries, or their management objectives. And changes in species, age class, ground conditions, and so on typically form the divisions between subcompartments. So with this, you would end up dividing your compartment into a number of subcompartments until you divided the whole compartment up, basically. And they are a fundamental concept in forest management, and they're key to producing a coherent, holistic management plan. For myForest, the third type of mapping component we have, we refer to them as features, and this is really, it's a catch-all for anything that isn't one of the other categories. They can be points, lines, or polygons. They can be used for recording habitats, infrastructure, so in this case it's a forest ride, historic environment features, that sort of thing. So here we have a screenshot from myForest showing you what the interface looks like. This isn't a live demo, but we'll get onto that. And one of the most useful base maps that you can access is a Google satellite view. As you can see, depending on how clear the picture is, sometimes you can glean an awful lot of information from this sort of view. So we'll see how this woodland's been divided up in a moment. It is a critical part of woodland management and planning. It underpins how you go about mapping your woodland and storing data using that structure of subcompartments. So how you do it will depend on a number of factors, including the scale and complexity of the site, the presence of special features or constraints, and your objectives. The nice thing about this image is you can see some of the individual species. So the larch, for example, I'll just go back to the unshaded area. You can see the larch trees are bright yellow. So this must have been in early autumn when this was taken. So you can actually sometimes pick out individual species. Plus the sun was low, so you can see long shadows from the taller trees and short shadows from the shorter trees. So you can get a sense of the size of the trees from this as well. So you can hopefully see from the way that I've divided this woodland up how the compartment boundaries, like this one running right through the middle of the woodland here, it's a very strong one. There's a track all the way down the middle. Follow things like tracks and rides. There's a ride running across here as well. And the subcompartments that are areas within those compartments that are uniform in some way. So you can see I've drawn around the edges of this area here because it's distinctly different from this area and this area. And And over here, we've got an area that was clear felled and restocked. So I've mapped it separately from the areas to the east and the west of it. So now we get into the nitty-gritty of how we actually refer to our compartments and subcompartments and how we start organizing our data. So compartments are always numbered and subcompartments are always lettered. So you can see in this particular example, we've got 6 compartments, which you can see on the left-hand side of the screen here. And then within those 6 compartments, we've got a number of subcompartments, all of which have a letter. So you probably can't actually see on this image, it's small, but the subcompartments are all labeled with something like 2E, 5B, and the compartments are numbered 2, 1, and 6, and so on. So that's just the conventional way of dividing up a woodland and referring to it in forestry management. So it's really vital for collating detailed information in a systematic way. And some of those things that you might need that information for, we've touched on this already. This is the inventory and plan of ops from the Forestry Commission. A blank Scottish Forestry felling permission application. So you can complete the thinning section of this using data in myForest. You might also be using the data so that you can liaise with stakeholders and funders. So a grant application, for example, you need to know what your woodland consists of before you can do that. So you get that information from myForest. And then the last one I've got here is monitoring for regulatory compliance. So that's where the UK Forestry Standard comes in. And it really underpins everything in myForest, even down to our data layers are organized according to these 8 chapters from the UK Forestry Standard. So we're very much geared towards forestry, and that is really our USP, if you like. So just to touch on how you actually go about doing your mapping in myForest, we deliberately made it quick and easy. It's not necessarily as advanced as using some of these more bespoke or actually more generic GIS packages like QGIS and ArcGIS, but it's much more accessible. You can basically pick up your mouse and get started mapping. You can just jump in and start doing that. And you don't have to set up any complicated, what they're called data schemas, where you have different fields with different types of data in them, because that's already been done for you in myForest. So this screenshot just shows you at the subcompartment level how your data is organized. This is an inventory tab, so it's a bit small again, I'm afraid, but you've got different species here with the percentage of the area, and it's all it's linked to the mapping. So if you change the area on your map because you've adjusted a boundary, then the area for that species, because it's all done by percentages in here, will be automatically adjusted. So it's all linked together, which is really what makes it so powerful. So that's the end of the slideshow. I'm just going to, this is going to be recorded, so you'll have access to this. Basically some useful links for learning more about woodland management. We have resources on our website that help with the process of doing your woodland management, myForest, and various other things too. We have a YouTube channel where all of our tutorial videos are, and we're expanding that all the time. We're improving and putting more tutorial videos on there. Here we've got the Forestry Commission of Scottish Forestry, Northern Irish Forest Service, and Natural Resources Wales, NRW, and their various different takes on woodland management. I confess, because I would normally feel plenty of loyalty towards the Forest Service that used to employ me, management plans in the private sector in Northern Ireland just don't really exist. And the website's unfortunately not that great either. But if you are managing woodland in Northern Ireland, there are some resources here. So it might be worth a look. Okay, so I'm now going to segue, hopefully smoothly, into a demonstration of myForest. Can I just get some thumbs up that you can now see a myForest tab or not? If any of you are still awake. Yes, I've had a thumbs up. Thank you very much. So that's taken much longer than I thought it would. We've only got, am I right, Jen? We've only got 15 minutes left.
Yes, that's right.
Right, okay. Okay, let's try and do this very, very quickly with 5 minutes of just demonstrating what myForest looks like. I thought that would take 20 minutes. It's taking me 30 minutes. Um, what myForest looks like and what we can get out of it. This is when you register, you can either be an owner or an agent. And an owner has one woodland, an agent has as many as you like. So this is an agent account, and I'm just going to open a real forest here, which has been completed in myForest. So this is the one we saw some screenshots of just now. I'll just turn off some of those labels just to make it a little bit clearer. To load. Turn off some of those features. So this is the view that you get when you're into your account in myForest. It's a map that you can scroll around and zoom in and out of. You have a choice of base maps. If you're paying a subscription, you get access to different ones, as I have here. So we've got large-scale Ordnance Survey mapping. We zoom into that, you'll see it's nice large-scale mapping. And also these top 4 are available. Actually, the top 6, including the OpenStreetMap, are available on free accounts. We've also got lots of data layers, which as I said before, they're all organized around the chapters of the UK Forestry Standard. They're also organized around the different countries. Don't have Northern Ireland on here yet, unfortunately. So, for example, we can switch on the ancient woodland layer, and you can see where the ancient woodland is in the area. So those are the data layers. Just to show you, I guess, as well how the subcompartment structure works. This is the same sort of information we saw on the screenshot just now, where you have your inventory data. You can do a felling license proposal. So in this case, we've got a proposal here already in, and in the case of England with the Forestry Commission, you can turn that into a file that you can upload to felling licenses online flow, but it also feeds into the inventory and plan of ops that I was showing you just now. So just to touch on some of the, I'll just very quickly look at UKFS check as well. So this is the sort of quiz that I was telling you about just now. Essentially, it takes you through a guided series of questions testing your current management practices. It gives you extra, oh, sorry about that. It gives you extra links to guidance as well. And it basically, again, it covers all the various different chapters of the standard. And after you've done that, you can download a certificate and a report saying how you've done. So I'll just, yes, very quickly look at some of the outputs we can get. So you can produce map outputs like this, which is a fairly standard thing that you need to be able to do for your woodland management. You'd have to submit these if you were submitting a plan to the Forestry Commission or Scottish Forestry. So there's some various maps that you can do. This is what the UKFS checker certificate looks like. Aren't I great? I've achieved gold level. And the report. Now, the report is actually a really useful document because not only does it tell you, summarize for you what your answers were to the various questions, but it gives you the context. So it's actually got excerpts from the UKFS. And as I said, it's a very complex document. So to have it just summarized like this, it makes it much more accessible. It gives you an understanding of the context of the question in the context of the UK Forestry Standard. We also saw what a woodland management plan that's been generated in myForest looks like from the cover point of view. You can see, again, if you're familiar with this document, this is exactly what the Word document version from the Forestry Commission looks like. Although the formatting's slightly better, you don't end up with headings that are pushed onto the next page because the page formatting is broken or things like that. And we also have, if I can just see the tabs here, and it'll be an Excel spreadsheet. You've seen the inventory and plan of operations, which is one of our main outputs. So you probably don't need to see that again. Right, 10 minutes for questions. Sorry, that was so rushed at the end.
No, that's great, Andrew. Thank you for that. A really great talk, and I know you said it was rushed, but it's really great just to kind of see my forest, even if it's, we're not getting kind of the nitty-gritty detail there. So yeah, thank you for that. So we have got a few questions that have come in. So Aled has asked, how often are the various data layers updated in myForest?
Thank you, Alan. I can't give a simple answer to that question. So some of the data layers are hosted by us, and we download them from the owners of the data, and then upload them to myForest. And we review those every few months. So as soon as they're updated, we'll put up the latest version. But we're not always told when the latest versions are up, so there can be a bit of a lag. Other ones, we've got what's called an API, so it's a direct feed. So in the case of all the Welsh data layers, for example, they come from a thing called Data Map Wales, and they all come directly fed straight into myForest. So as soon as they're updated in their source, then they're up to date in myForest as well. So it depends on the nature of the feed or where the data's coming from.
Brilliant. That's good to know. Ruth has asked, has the UK started to take forest fires as a serious risk for now and in the future with climate change?
I would say probably not enough. I mean, there are policy moves in that direction, but to me, it does seem to be a really, really big risk. And even when you see, as there have been near me in the last few years, in places like Wareham Forest, the serious fires that they've had there, even though they've put in place fire breaks, even though that's a Forestry England site where they should really be being the exemplar for how to do these things, they've suffered from really serious forest fires. But I suppose if nothing else, that just shows that there's only a limit. There's a limit to what you can do in terms of preventing fires. And I think it's all on all of us. It's on not just the forestry sector, but it's on the public at large, because most of these fires seem to be started, if not deliberately, then by accident, by people who are just being a little bit irresponsible, whether it's from a discarded barbecue. I've actually twice seen fires start because of broken glass and the sun shining on the glass. So there are things as a society we should be doing, but it's definitely true that there's a higher wildfire risk than there used to be, and we really should be addressing it.
Yeah, and that's really prevalent, isn't it? Like with the current heat wave that we're experiencing, I'm sure there'll be, unfortunately, news reports of forest fires in the next few days.
Yeah,
Fingers crossed there isn't, but it wouldn't be a surprise.
yeah.
Um, so we've got a few more questions. So Kaz has asked if woodland management plan documents are in the public domain.
So in England, not. You can look on the Forestry Commission map browser and see which areas have got woodland management plans on them, but you can't actually access the management plans online. I'm not sure what the situation is in Scotland and Wales.
Brilliant. And then a couple more. So Graham, earlier in the talk, he put a comment in and asked about, so he might want to provide some context here, but he mentioned government handouts or payments for non-market public benefits. I don't know if you want to expand on that, Graham, if you're still here.
Yes, please do, Graham.
Yeah, I'm still here. I just rail a bit at
Yeah,
government handouts, and you can't think of them as payments for non-market benefits from the government. But I would agree with you that it's good to have some real money from timber
mm,
income as well, because governments change their minds, and what they're paying for one time,
yeah,
they might not pay for in the future.
yeah.
Whereas
It's a,
timber has
it,
a real value, and
exactly.
it's good to have that behind you.
Yeah, and we really struggle. I'm guessing from your accent that you're based in Scotland, and at least I think in Scotland you recognise the value of commercial forests. In England, we're planting far too many woods, which may or may not produce timber, but the timber is not being promoted as a potential objective. And we should be planting multi-purpose forests, and we should therefore be planting forests that will probably produce timber in the future, rather than forests that might produce timber in the future. Just it needs a little bit more of a sort of a refocus, if you like, I think, in terms of the objectives that we're trying to achieve with all this planting that we're doing at the moment.
Yeah, Scottish accent, but I'm actually in Northumberland. Used to manage Kielder Forest, so
Very
timber
good.
was big there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Brilliant. So Winnie has asked, I have a neglected forest privately owned where I live. How can we deal with it?
Do you know who owns it? I mean, it's just such an open question. It's the first thing to do would be to find. Yeah, thanks. You just put in no.
Yeah.
You can't compel an owner to manage their woodland. Um, it's really it's such a difficult thing to do. The only times when any sort of legislation would kick in is if it was if there was a safety issue. There is legislation to do with plant health as well, which is essentially if you've got a species and you're in a demarcated area where there are movement restrictions, then you can't move that species away from your woodland if you've felled it and so on. But if an area is just neglected and not being managed, then that's not even going to apply. So unless there's a health and safety issue to do with dead and dying trees near footpaths and things like that, very little that you can do, unfortunately.
Oh, thank you for that. I think yeah, maybe a little bit of investigation on Winnie's hands there. Um, we've got one final question, which I think might be useful to many people here. Somebody has asked, does my forest have a demo or test function to practice?
Well, no, but I would say it's basically free to sign up. So register an account. You don't have to pay anything. You can then try out most of the functionality. So there are a few things that are behind the paywall, and there are things like some of the more advanced data layers, some of the large scale, or the ordnance survey mapping at large scale has you have to pay for that. Um, a few of the downloads you can only generate if you're paying, but the majority of the functionality is available free. So I would say I would urge you just to try it out. You don't need to sign up for a trial or anything like that. You just register as a regular user and try it out. And there are, as I've said, tutorials on our YouTube channel is probably the best way to find those that take you through the whole process of setting your account up and setting your forest, your woodland up in myForest and starting to use some of the functionality in myForest. So there are plenty of tutorials there to help as well.
No, that's really great. Thank you. That is it for questions. Oh, we've just had one last minute question come in, so I'll just cover this.
I can see that
Um,
one.
yeah, it's from Mary. I'll just read it out for everybody. Is importing maps created in other GIS an option?
Yes. So I'm not sure quite exactly what Mary means by maps. If it's literally the polygons, that it's a bit of a ambiguous kind of terminology that we have, but we refer to those as the actual spatial data in myForest. If it's the polygons of your subcompartments, your compartments, your boundary, whatever, then yes, you can export those from another GIS and import them into myForest. If it's a map, like we're talking about, we showed a few just now, a PDF map of your compartments or something like that, then no, because they don't tend to be of a standard file format. So I think what you're referring to is probably the polygon data, and yes, you can move that data into myForest. In fact, that is the way. If I'd had more time, that's the way I would urge you to start with your mapping. In England and Scotland, you can actually download files from the government. So in England, it's the RPA, and in Scotland, it's Rural Payments and Services, I think, RPNS. And you can download files from them, map with them in myForest, and that means that your boundaries will match, if you like, the official government boundaries for the land. So your mapping is going to be accurate at the end of the day. And I didn't have time to show that, but it's a really useful feature to get started in mapping. Rural Payments Agency, Mary.
No, that's great. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that is us for questions. So I just want to say thank you to everybody for joining us again today and for all your great questions. It's been really great, and hopefully you've learned a lot, and you can now go and get started on myForest and watch all those videos to find out all the ins and outs of how it works. And lastly, just to thank you again to Andrew
Thank you very
for
much,
that
Jen.
really great talk. You've covered so much for people to go away and get familiar with myForest and improve woodlands all over the country.
Thank you very much, Jan, and thanks everybody.